Hello, I'm Joseph Oppong, your Associate Dean, and today we're going to talk about how to find funding to support your research. And the primary idea is how to write a winning grant application. There are various entities that want to fund your research, and we need to identify the appropriate agency to get you funding for your research. So when you look at the US population, not many people have a PhD. In fact, the latest data based on the 2016 estimates suggest that just about less than 2% of the American population has a doctoral degree. And professional degrees such as accounting or attorney, you also have another 5%. So altogether, you're about 3% of the American population with a degree higher than a master's. And about 12% of the American population has a master's degree or higher. Why is that? One reason is cost. And for many people, they're paying off the loans they accumulated from undergrad. They don't have time or they don't have the resources to acquire a graduate education. In fact, we go to the Council of Graduate Schools meetings. And I remember one time we spent a whole Saturday morning talking about graduate student loan debt. In fact, student loan debt is now higher than credit card debt in this country. And so our big challenge is students overwhelmed by debt from undergrad are not applying to graduate school. So it is in our interest to try to teach you ways of finding funding. The cool thing is that there are funding agencies that are interested in providing funding for you to do your research. They want to pay you because you're smart. Now, we can help with that. So we talked about the student loan debt. For many, that's a big problem. While they're in grad school, they cannot even focus because of the overwhelming debt. Increasingly, also, you have 20-somethings who are moving back home to live with mom and dad because of the debt that they accumulated. Here's one thing I tell our grad students. If you're smart enough to go to grad school, you're smart enough to get somebody else to pay for it. And I can show you how. And this presentation here is going to deal exactly with that. Naomi Wood from our Office of Grants and Contracts has talked about using Pivot as part of this presentation to identify funding resources for various projects. Now, the question is, what makes for a successful proposal writer? Let's say that you have identified a possible grant option. What do you need to be successful? There's some fundamental rules, and that's what we're going to talk about. Writing a grant proposal is like playing a game. You have to play by the rules, which means you have to get the most recent guidelines. You have to read the guidelines, and you have to follow the guidelines. If you don't know the rules of the game, there's no way that you can win that game. And so you need to know the rules of the game. I say it, and my students laugh at it. There's something called the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And so if you want to get the gold, then you have to follow the rules of that person who is making those rules. And so the funding agencies, you get to give money out. But they're giving money out not for everything, but for some specific things. Your job is to look at the request for proposals, the RFP, and then identify what are the rules of the game, and follow the rules of the game, and then compete in that game. You want to make sure that you have very clear writing as you're writing your research proposal. You want to make sure that the people who are reading your proposal have a clear idea what you're talking about. Now, I review for several agencies in the National Science, including the National Science Foundation. And frequently, our job is to simply help to exclude those who should not be considered. For example, the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, there are 30,000 applicants, and they award only 2,000 of them every year. So my job as a reviewer is to help to zero in on those that are worth considering, that are worth funding. And therefore, your job as an applicant is to make sure that you write as clearly as possible. And if you don't, then you give me an easy excuse to not look at your proposal. So what makes a good proposal and hopefully a successful proposal? That's the question we're going to be thinking about. I think this sums it up. A grant proposal is a selling document written to influence decision makers, people like me, convince them to commit dollars in support of a specific project. A winning proposal addresses an important question with an innovative idea. It's well expressed with a clear indication of methods for pursuing the idea, evaluating the findings, and making them known to all who need to know. I've chosen my words very carefully. It addresses an important question. What is your question? It is bringing something new. What have you done that has not been done before? What are you going to do? The idea is well expressed so that the reviewer knows that he doesn't have to go hunting for it. And there's a clear indication of the methods that will be used for pursuing the idea, evaluating the findings, and making them known to all who need to know. We're going to take this and break it down. A key point that I made earlier is that you need to follow the rules. What are the guidelines? What are the rules of the game? You need to look at the agency or the funding organization's guidelines and follow them to the letter. It may be short, a page or so, or it might be 10 pages. Some federal agencies have about 100 pages. You need to make sure that you know clearly what you're looking for. They indicate how they want to see the finished proposal arrive at their door. And you want to make sure that your proposal arrives at their door in the way they want to see it. The guidelines will usually include agency priorities or themes. What are they looking to fund? What areas are they interested in? It will also include specific direction on formatting. How many pages do they allow? What is the word count? What are the margins? Like, is it a one-page margin? Is it two-page margin? Are there font size limitations? It includes information about the budget. It includes information about the deadline or the target date. Deadline, that is the absolute deadline. Your proposal must be received by that deadline. Target date, sort of a little bit open. We'd like to receive your proposal by this time. But you need to be aware of every one of these, because otherwise your proposal will probably not be reviewed. What are the components of a proposal? There's usually the executive summary or the abstract. There's usually a statement of need. Why is this project necessary? There's a project description or narrative. That's the nuts and bolts of how the project will be implemented. It might be 3 pages or 20 pages. Again, see the request for proposals. One of the things you hear me say repeatedly, read the RFP, read the RFP, read the RFP. Those are the rules of the game. The budget. What are you going to use the money for? The organization info, sometimes they want to know which department, which lab are you a part of. At UNT here, they want to know, okay, so you are at UNT. It gives them some sense of the infrastructure that's available to you at the institution or the mission of your institution. And then finally, there's a conclusion, a summary of everything that you've said. And it's important to read the guidelines to see if that is needed. So the components of a proposal, we're going to delve into that a little bit more. There's usually a narrative or project description. Again, read the guidelines. What do they want in that project description or the narrative? That will help you to determine how much space you need to use for the literature review, how much space you need to spend on the description of the need for the research and the explanation of your methodology. The request for proposals or the agency guidelines will specify these in a lot of detail. The narrative project description also addresses the need or significance of your proposal, the literature review, objectives, activities, and evaluation. There's room also for describing the researcher and your credentials. Why are you uniquely qualified to undertake this research? It will help to determine whether you meet the review criteria. And in all of these things, it's important to write clearly. And you need to communicate that you are addressing the agency priorities. If they want to find something about birds, don't send them something about reptiles. So what is the goal of your research? The goal should be an overall concept. It's a little bit more abstract. It's a broad statement of what you want to accomplish. And then you bring that down, again, depending on what the funding agency wants. Your objectives for this research proposal should be very, very clear. And the SMART acronym is a way to just articulate that. Objectives should be specific, that's S, measurable outcomes, that's for M, achievable, attainable, that's A, realistic, time-bound. So it's achievable in a time period. If it is not meeting any of these, we'll assume that you have no clue what you're talking about, and it's not worth wasting time on you. Your activities, your action steps should be mapped to the objectives. You should explain how the project will accomplish the objectives. You should discuss only those actions that support an objective, and you should fully describe the work to be done in the project. When I read your activities, I should have a clear sense of what you're doing, why it's important, and how that is going to help you to accomplish your goal. Frequently, you have one or more activities for each objective. It should specify who will do them, when will they be done, how will they be accomplished, why did you choose this approach rather than another approach, what other methods were available, how long will each of these take? For example, I have a grant, an ethics grant. It's a good-sized grant. But the goal is to try to figure out how do we teach ethics to grad students. So we decided that the approach would be to use a game. Now, I am not an expert on gaming. And so the people in our Center for Learning Enhancement, Assessment and Redesign, CLEAR, they develop the game. So in writing the proposal, I specify that CLEAR, our people, are going to develop the game. So when the reviewers are looking at the proposal, they're not going, yeah, we know Joseph. He's good in medical geography, but he doesn't know anything about gaming. They see the expert there that I'm bringing in, and therefore it authenticates the proposal. Every proposal has to have some evaluation. We need some way of measuring how we know what we know. How are you going to know you have accomplished what you set out to do? The funding agency wants to be able to determine if their money has been well spent. And so you need to specify, this is how I'm going to evaluate what we set out to accomplish. How well did the program achieve its goal? Did the project meet its objectives? Were project activities implemented as planned? How effective were the activities in achieving those objectives? You have to evaluate that so that you will know that you did what you said you wanted to do. Now, writing issues. This is a very easy way to get disqualified. Let me tell you right now, and I'll repeat it later on. Don't irritate the reviewers. All your reviewers are busy people, and they don't have time to waste on sloppy writing. Sloppy writing irritates. I'm one of those weirdos. When I pick up a page, the first thing I see is what's incorrect on that page. And you know what? Bad spelling, poor spelling, grammatical errors communicate someone who is not paying attention to detail. It undermines the credibility of your research. So regardless how brilliant your research proposal is, if it has grammatical errors and poor writing, it just makes no one take you seriously. So spelling errors, overusing technical terms, using acronyms, writing overly complex sentences, failing to attend to paragraph coherence issues, using the passive voice, this is going to be done. Who is going to do it? You need to specify who is going to do it, including non-parallel lists. All of these are ways that indicate that you are not paying attention to the detail. Or at the very least, it makes it difficult for your reviewer to follow exactly what you're trying to do. Remember, your goal is to persuade me, the reviewer, to recommend to the funding agency to fund your research. So if I don't get what you're talking about, I am not going to be enthusiastically recommending your research. Writing issues diminish your credibility as a researcher. If you fail to address the criteria, for example, they say we want to see the intellectual merit and the broader impact, specify clearly, this is the intellectual merit, this is the broader impact. If you fail to provide the abstract problem statement and there's a budget disconnect, a disconnect between your budget and your proposal, those are all signs that you should not be funded. When you fail to address the assessment and administration, when you fail to include information that is required, or when you include information that is not necessary, extraneous to the work you're proposing to do, all of those just irritate the reviewers. You're forcing me to read some extra material that's not necessary. It doesn't put me in a good frame of mind to recommend you. And maybe I'll make you pay for it. And so you want to avoid irritating the reviewers with your writing. So let's go into more detail on the proposal itself. The abstract, it is usually the last thing that you write. It may be short, but it packs a punch. It is the first thing we read as reviewers. In fact, just last week, I received a proposal from a funding agency. All they sent me was the abstract. I read the abstract and then I decide whether I want to review that proposal or not. So you need to grab the reviewer's attention in the abstract. The abstract should be brief, typically 200 words, sometimes it's 1 page, again depending on the funding agency. It's the first thing we see, but it should be the last thing you write because it should be capturing everything and sufficiently intriguing so that I want to go in and read the rest of the proposal. Oh, and of course, there should be no grammatical errors in the abstract. The abstract should answer the basic questions. What? The topic of the project, its goals, objectives. What do you intend to do? You should also answer the question, why? What is the problem issue to be addressed and why is it important? One of the questions I ask students to think about all the time, why is this important? Why should I care? And then you should answer the question, how? What methods are you going to be using to accomplish this goal you set for yourself? How are you going to do the work? You should answer the question, who? What's the target population? What group are you going to be studying? And as a reviewer, I shouldn't be guessing who you're going to be studying. You should talk about when. When are you going to complete this project? How long a timeline? You should also talk about, so what? What is the significance? How will your findings help us to know something that we didn't know before? Okay, we're all excited, right? Let's get started. You have an idea. You have a hunch. You want to write a proposal to get somebody to fund your research. Where do you begin? Perhaps you have that idea. Or perhaps you did what Naomi told you and you went into Pivot. And you found a grant that seems to address your needs. What do? You contact the Office for Nationally Competitive Scholarships where Jim DeBain works. Or you can contact me in the graduate school. Or you can contact UNT here, the Office of Grants and Contracts Administration. And you discuss your idea and get help for locating, the funding opportunity. or perhaps you've identified that funding opportunity already, and they can discuss with you how to position yourself to write for that particular funding opportunity. Now, typically it's important to start with a one-pager. A one page that succinctly summarizes everything you want to talk about. It's not too long. I can read it. I can get the gist of the idea. That's important. You can send that one pager to the funding agency, the program officer, or somebody. They can look at it and they can say, yeah, this is interesting. I think you might want to target this funding agency. If you have the RFP, again, contact the Office for Grants and Contracts Administration to go over the request for proposals with you to help you in the process. And as a grad student, I'll be happy to discuss that with you. You need to create a template. Remember the golden rule. You have to follow the rules of the game to be successful in the game. So ideally, copy the agency's heading into your Word document to guide your work. Start with describing the need, significance of the problem, the issue, the project. And what do you mean by a significant project? A project is significant if it, number one, solves a new problem, solves a problem that we have always had, creates a new and important knowledge, it creates a model that someone else is going to apply or try to use to address some other issues. It improves the human condition, and it improves the scientific technique. You're doing something novel. You're doing something that is going to improve what we know right now. So here's a brief outline of a sequence of proposal development. Number one, you think about the needs, significance. Why do we need this? You might go something like, although we know A, B, C, D, we don't know D. And my research is going to address D. So you're showing the need, the significance of that. You identify the problem statement, your hypothesis. This is what I think is going to happen, and I'm going to find out how that works. You specify the objectives, the methods, the work plan, the activities. And then you specify how you are going to evaluate the work that you do. How are you going to disseminate the results? What's your budget? And then you need to provide justification for that budget. We'll talk a little bit more about the budget later on. It should have a clear introduction, the literature that you cited, the forms that you have to complete, again, depending on the funding agency. And it should have your summary, your abstract, and your bio-sketch or your beta if it is required. I pointed out before that you need to write very clearly. So begin with an outline, either the agency steps or an outline of your project. And hear me very clearly, don't just enter your data directly online into the form that they are provided online. NSF, for example, requires fast lane. Don't sit there and just type that in, because if you're like me, you probably make mistakes when you're typing. The idea here is write it out somewhere, and then you can cut it and paste it in the form. That way, you are sure that there are no grammatical errors and everything is making sense, is coherent. If you have one page, that's all you have. So make sure that the one page is addressing everything that they need addressed. So you have a name of your project. Keep the language clear and simple. Many of us reviewers are experts in our own fields. We are not specialists in your field. I'm a professor of geography. So they'll send me something in maybe sociology to review. So your job is to communicate so that as a professor of geography, I can understand it and make sense of what you're talking about. So clear writing is vital. You need to avoid jargon and acronyms, and you need to revise and edit it. At UNT here, almost every one of our grad students and undergrads, when you're writing a proposal, you play a game of ping pong with Jim DeBain. What does that mean? You send the one paragraph that you're using to fill this part here to Jim, and he responds back with comments and criticisms. and then you send it back to him. You play ping pong back and forth until we have a final proposal that we are happy with. This is what Jim will tell you. Go ahead and write your document. Make sure that your advisor, the faculty member, is happy with it in terms of the technical detail, and then you can play ping pong in trying to clean out and smoothen the language. Budget. Let's talk about money. You want somebody to pay you. Now, how much money do you need? Well, as much money as you need to do the work. Nothing is off the table. I find this cartoon here very interesting. It's funny. So here is Joe. He comes and he says to me, his professor, I need a budget estimate for my project, but I don't have a scope for or a design for it yet. Okay, my estimate is $3,583,729. And Joe goes, you don't know anything about my project. And the response is, that makes two of us. Because your project should inform the budget. How much you need depends on what you're going to do. It is not how much money you want, it is how much the project costs. And hear me very clearly on this. The budget is frequently the last thing we look at when we're reviewing a proposal. If we like the science, we will come back and talk to you about the budget. It has happened to me before a couple of times. I submitted a proposal to NSF. They liked it. They came back and said, Joseph, we like this. Let's talk about the budget. Let's revise the budget. In fact, in one proposal, I was asking for $300,000. They said, this is intriguing, but you don't have a proof of concept yet. So how about we give you $50,000 to come back and demonstrate proof of concept? I said, sure. And so I went back, and after I demonstrated the proof of concept, this time they gave me the grant that I was requesting. And so you should request what you need to do the job. You need to ask for what you need to do the work. You need to justify your request. For example, I need $2,000 for travel. If $2,000 is what it's going to take to travel to your site, that is what you need to request. Don't ask for $50 because you think that they are more likely to give you money if you ask for a small amount. That's crazy. It shows that you are either lying or you don't know the true scope of your work. So reviewers are usually emphasizing the quality of the project rather than the budget. We value the project's quality over the budget. Again, with the budget, you need to follow the sponsor and institutional guidelines. If they say that the maximum we'll fund is $50,000, don't go asking for $300,000. It's an easy way to get your proposal thrown out. When you are in doubt, ask the program officer. How do you begin your budget? Read the guidelines. Read the RFP. Consider the overall project budget before you begin to develop individual budget items for each year. Again, think about the agency limits. Think about the items they will fund. If they specify clearly that we will not fund living expenses, don't include living expenses in your proposal. If they specify that we're not going to cover tuition, don't include tuition in your proposal. If they specify that we'll cover tuition, go ahead and include tuition in your proposal. They specify the level that they will fund. Maybe they want your institution to contribute 10% or 50%, whatever, but you need to follow the guidelines. Remember the golden rule. You need to follow how many years they are willing to fund. The NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, for example, they will fund you for 3 years within a 5-year window. So you need to be very clear what you're budgeting for. You need to outline the budget in the format the agency requires. The agency says, we want to see the budget broken down in this format, give it to them the way they want it. Sometimes the grant may be over 5 years or so. Make sure that you build the cost of living or whatever changes into the budget. If the project is over several years, build in the cost of increases, like raises for the people who are working on the project. You need to develop a budget explanation or justification. to show how the budget figures were compiled. How did you arrive at those figures? Did you just, okay, I need $50,000. Is that how you came up with it? No. I need to spend 20 hours on this equipment here, and every hour is this much. That's how you need to specify that. It is important to ensure that the budget coincides with the narrative and falls within the time frame that is allowed. Again, regarding the budget, the point is read the guidelines. Here is one funding agency, the Frank Guggenheim Foundation. And this is quoting them directly. They say, and if you submit a budget that contradicts any of these carefully described guidelines, we will have reason to think of you as a careless reader and a thoughtless applicant. This will inevitably be reflected in our estimation of the potential of your scholarship. They make it very clear. We look at the budget closely, make sure that the budget reflects what you're proposing to do. The external review process, let's talk about it. Typically, you have different types. Sometimes it's a peer review, sometimes it's a panel review, sometimes it's a staff review, or it's a board review. Peer review, they will send it out to peers, people who are working in that field. This is typical for your faculty grant. And they submit the review to the funding agency. As a panel review, they send the proposal out to the individuals, and all the individuals who are reviewers gather together as a panel. And then they talk about it. There's a primary reviewer who is going to talk about these are the merits of the proposal, and they're going to dissect it, and then they come up with a decision whether to, a recommendation whether to fund or not fund the proposal. There's a staff review. This is the funding agency staff will review the proposal. And then there's a board review. Now, in submitting a proposal, it is okay to recommend someone who should review the proposal. Because sometimes funding agencies have a difficulty identifying who is most suited to review this proposal. It is also okay to mention somebody who should not be a reviewer, especially if that person is in competition with you and that person is going to be negative on your proposal. You need to be aware of the points assigned to proposal sections. NSF clearly says we want to see the intellectual merit and the broader impact. Make sure that you address those clearly. When you're writing your proposal, you need to keep the reviewer in mind. Don't assume that the reviewers already know the subject as well as you do. But don't go overboard. Use the agency's subject headings for review criteria. Don't make them hunt for the significance of your project. Don't make me work. I won't. And guess who's going to pay for it? It's you. The most important rule to keep in mind, don't annoy the reviewers. You want to put them in a good frame of mind so that they know where to find what they are looking for, and they can find it and then recommend you enthusiastically. Here are simple things to do to avoid automatic rejection. Formatting issues. If they say that the proposal should be 10 pages, don't send them a 20-page proposal. Submitting a proposal over the budget ceiling. They say we're willing to fund only up to $10,000. Don't send them a proposal for $50,000. They say the deadline for submission is January 10th. Don't send them a proposal after January 31st. They say they want to fund submitting a proposal outside the agency interest. They want to fund a proposal on birds. Don't send them one on snakes, because they're not going to fund that. And that is why you need to read the RFP, read the request for proposals, make sure that you're meeting the agency guidelines. All right, we've talked about all the negative things about proposals that shouldn't be funded. What are some characteristics of well-written, fundable proposals? What are examples of proposals we like to see? Number one, there is innovation, and that innovation is clear. The proposal demonstrates the relevance to the agency's priorities. The author of the proposal, the PI, demonstrates that they are capable, they are competent, and they can undertake the research. as reviewers, we're looking for you to demonstrate why you are uniquely qualified to undertake the proposal, the research that you are talking about. Is the study feasible? Yes, those are things we're looking for. The time schedule, if you're going to collect data over 5 summers, don't tell us that you can do the project in 2 years, because that's not going to happen. The proposal that is well written is probably conveying some enthusiasm, excitement. If you're bored with your proposal, probably I'm not going to be very enthusiastic in reading it. It has simple, straightforward language, and there are no grammatical errors. If I see the grammatical errors, I'm not going to spend time reading the rest of the proposal. And the literature search is complete. Remember, you are adding to knowledge, so you should build on what other people have done so that you can show this is the frontier and this is how I'm going to advance the frontier. Top 10 reasons why proposals are not funded for unsuccessful proposals. You probably have figured this out already. Number 1, the project doesn't address the agency priorities. Give them exactly what they want. Number 2, it doesn't follow guidelines. Yeah, it's easy to throw that into the trash. Number 3, it is not a compelling idea. Yeah, if you're just beating around the bush, sure. The ideas are not clearly presented. It's a brilliant idea, but it's not clearly presented. I kind of figure out what they're talking about. Methodology appears to be flawed. Or there's overuse of jargon, and I'm trying to figure out what are they really talking about. The project is so very ambitious. They want to solve the whole world's problems in one proposal. That is not going to happen. The narrative and budget don't correspond. It means this person is either being lying or doesn't know what they're talking about, but it diminishes your credibility. The presentation overall, the proposal is poorly presented. Or the work has already been done. If the work has been done already, why should we find you to do that same work? Okay. Now, what do you do if your proposal is rejected? Welcome to the world of reality. All of us, successful reviewers, successful proposal writers, have gone through that rejection before. So if your proposal is rejected, don't give up. Get the reviews. Typically, they would give you reviews. Go carefully through the reviews. Find out what the reviewers were looking for, what they did not find, what they did not get. Repackage it and send it back. Talk to the agency contact if they will talk to you about what could I have done differently. For the NSF especially, they will give you suggestions. An improved proposal would do A, B, C, D, those kinds of things. So reevaluate, revise, and resubmit your proposal. Perhaps you might want to look for other potential funding agencies. Maybe you submit a budget for $50,000 that is above what the agency you apply to is funding. Look for another funding agency and include the revised comments and send it to that new agency. Above all else, you have to be persistent. Remember the words of Christopher Morley, big shots are just little shots who keep shooting. So if you keep shooting and shooting and shooting, ultimately you're going to hit it. So my advice to you, focus on your research interests. Intrigue the reviewers. And if you do all of these things, I'm sure you can win a grant proposal. You see, success in grants starts with knowing the RFP. The RFP spells the rules of the game. You need to follow the rules carefully, and you need to keep trying. And yes, you can. This is what I want to see. Timely, debt-free graduation. And it starts with getting somebody else to pay you to be smart. Remember what I said before, if you're smart enough to go to grad school, you're smart enough to get somebody else to pay for it. And if you follow everything that we've talked about so far, I think you can get somebody else to pay for you. for your education. Okay, welcome and have a good time. Grant funding. Bye.